Hello, and welcome back. I'm Mr. Stiles, the Library Director of the Brush Library, and I'll guide you through Module 3, Part 1 video tutorial for the U.S. History Research Project, Primary Sources and Interlibrary Loan. There are a total of 4 videos in this module. This first video outlines the traits of primary sources. In the second video, you'll learn how to find primary sources in the library catalog, PeliCat, and library databases. The third video shows you how to find primary sources online and how to cite primary sources in Noodle Tools. The final video explains the process of requesting materials through interlibrary loan when you need something that isn't available at the Kaplan Brush Library. At the end of each video, you'll answer several review questions. Answering the review questions will strengthen your understanding of the material presented in the videos. Your instructor will see your responses and monitor your viewership. You have already studied primary sources in your history classes. Take a moment right now to think about how you would define a primary source. Here's a definition of a primary source taken from the University of California. Primary sources were either created during the time period being studied, or were created at a later date by the participant in the events being studied, as in the case of memoirs, and they reflect the individual viewpoint of the participant or observer. Take note of the fact that primary sources can be created either during the time of the event being studied or after the event. However, the author of the primary source must have a connection to that event by virtue of having been alive during that time. I'd like you to take another moment to brainstorm some examples of primary sources. Did you think of examples of primary sources? The ones that might be unfamiliar to you are realia and ephemera. Realia is a synonym for three-dimensional artifacts such as soldiers' uniforms, pottery, locks of hair, jewelry, and countless other primary sources. And ephemera are paper items that are transitory or ephemeral, meaning that they are not designed to be preserved as part of the historical record. Examples of ephemera are playbills, pamphlets, and ticket stubs. You'll come across some primary sources that are public and other primary sources that are private. A public primary source was published and intended for a wide audience, such as a newspaper article or a speech. A private source is one that the author never intended for a wide audience to view, such as a diary entry or a letter. Public and private primary sources will provide very different perspectives on the same event. Now that you know more about the different types of primary sources, you should consider some defining questions to ask. First, how does the author know the details about the event? Did the author witness the event firsthand or learn about it from other sources? From what evidence does he or she draw conclusions? You must critically assess the author's bias when evaluating primary sources. Bias will be more readily apparent in primary sources intended for private audiences, such as letters or diaries, than primary sources intended for public audiences, such as newspapers. However, keep in mind that all sources have bias regardless of their intended audience. Just think of various modern news outlets that betray a strong bias. For instance, New York Times and MSNBC have a liberal bias, where Fox News and the Wall Street Journal has a conservative bias. This is a list of sources that you can use to locate primary sources. The U.S. History LibGuide will provide you with an excellent list of resources to consult. You can also find primary sources in books, periodicals, databases, and other online sources. Now that you've learned about the traits of primary sources, you're ready to move on to the second video tutorial, in which you'll learn how to search for primary sources in PeliCat and in a library database. Remember to answer the review questions that will come up in a few seconds.